Hi, I'm Butch, and I like to make ball jointed figures and their accessories. Watch as I show you how easily and quickly we can make this Suzy Snacktime. This video will cover a start to finish of how to make your own posable toy. To begin, I'm going to need two things. Beads, which I make these lovely little molds for. When I'm making a doll, I'll end up making 30 or 40 beads. So these molds actually save an incredible amount of time. In this dark blue mold, it's a thicker rubber, and I really like it best. I start by superheating the clay first, getting it so gooey that you almost can't touch it. And then that way when I put it in the mold, it'll squish and take the shape really easily. I don't push it all the way down, I just want a rough shape. Then when I pass the bar through the balls, they turn into beads. This will center that bar on that bead for me, so I don't have to worry about trying to drill it out and center them after. With a final squish, and then I set it aside to cool, I can pull the bead out even without baking yet, which means every 4 or 5 minutes I can make a bead. The next thing I'm going to need is some tubes. I take a bar, and I just slather some bacon bond and put some polymer clay around the bar. While I'm pinching everything closed, I make sure that I keep the bar in the center. I don't want it drifting to one side or the other. I want to stay in the center of this tube because I'm going to use it as a spacer while I'm building my figures. You see why I'm going to do this a little later. I'm also going to need some other different colors of beads and tubes in this construction, so I'll build those right at the start too, and different colors of beads, and this will be the chest body core. I store the beads that I cast in the mold when I'm not using them. And here's how many beads I had to make up. Let bacon bond tack up a bit before you stick clay onto it. I constantly buff my roller with a dry paper towel just to keep it from having stuff stick to it. That's my trick. Because Suzy Snacktime's cranial unit is so much larger than my standard characters, I'm going to take one of my cast skulls and slowly build it up layer by layer till I get the dimension I'm looking for. Making a double elbow or a double knee joint is as easy as gluing two beads together. With a little bacon bond and some fresh clay, it's easy to do. And once you do, let it sit aside for a few minutes. Then when you go back to it, the polymer clay and the glue will stick to each other so much better. You won't have things try to slide because they're greasy. Plus, I find if you let the polymer clays stick together with that bacon bond, it actually makes it easier to blend the two. My secret to all my construction is build it up little by little. Polymer clay actually likes to be baked when it's on the thinner side. You get over an inch thick and it really doesn't like to bake. You keep it about a ½ inch to a ¼ inch thick max, and it will bake all the way through and cure nicely. I build a lot of cores for things, so feet and hands aren't much different. So I like to build the slipper foot for my feet right off the hop. That way I can get a good gauge on if I have to trim them out or not. And I also like to build my hands at the start. I'll make a mitt. I'll concentrate on the palm and the thumb and a little bit of the meat where the wrist joins up, but I won't do anything with the fingers because I end up cutting these off later on so that I can put movable fingers so that hands can open and close. Here we're going to be building a neck bead that's going to be almost identical to how I do my elbows and knees. Now that all my joint pieces are all made and I got my feet core and my hands first made, One of the things I'll end up doing is I'm going to end up cutting these fingers off right close to the start. But it's a good time that I can compare them, see if I'm going to trim or sand anything up to make sure things match. I do the same thing with the feet too, because I want to make sure that this arch is the same on both feet. And when they're baked up, this is a perfect time. If I have to, I can go in and carve some away or put some on. This type of waste here will end up with just a pivot on the top. When I construct the beads for the joints, I make sure that I run the seam lines together. Here, because I tried to recycle a waste from an earlier character almost a year ago, when I baked it, it had kind of cracked a little bit, so I'll just put a little bacon bond down in the crack. I can add just the tiniest little piece of fresh clay on each side, squeeze each back of the beads back into place, and everything will be fine. Like, you don't need to panic. That's what I love about polymer clay. If something cracks, it's easy enough to fix. And if you put some bacon bond in with that fresh clay, once it's baked, it's as good as it ever was. Like, it's like it never broke at all. Just remember, almost everything can be fixed when you're playing with polymer clay. Inserting my eyes at this stage helps me determine how big I need to make the rest of the back of her head. Now let's position her eyes so she's not looking cross-eyed. Both the elbows and the knees are going to need a stop to keep the legs and arms from hyperflexing or overextending. After we bake these, everything can get wrapped in aluminum foil. If I wrap the beads that I'm going to use in the joints in aluminum foil, I can form the polymer clay right up to it, and I don't have to worry about the bead and the body that I'm building baking together. Here's why I make those tubes. Using them as a spacer, I can ensure that both arms and both legs are identical sizes. This lets me make short and tall characters all in 12th scale. Polymer clay shrinks when it's baked, so anything I put on a bar I have to drill out a little bigger than the bar so it doesn't shrink and crack on it. The next trick you need to know is making a good socket. You can't cover more than half the bead and have a good socket whereabouts it can have any space to move around. A good socket has about a third of the bead covered. The other half to 3/4 of the bead, there'll be another section that covers about a third, and that 1/3 in between those two where they don't touch, that's where all your movement is created. That's why I say never cover more than half the bead. Because if you cover half and half, when they butt up together, there's nowhere for any movement to happen. There needs to be space. That negative space is where your movement will be. The benefit about building on these bars with the spacer already in there is you know the arms are going to be the same, like the bicep length, the forearm length, they're both going to be the same. This makes it so much easier to keep your character's body parts symmetrical. I do like to layer things up slowly, little by little. I don't have the greatest luck when I try to do it out of a thicker piece and maybe carve a bunch out of it. Never works out well for me. Wrapping the polymer clay around the tubes, also it's a lot easier because polymer clay would rather stick to polymer clay than to the metal steel bar. Now here we're going to make the fingers to go on those hands. They're tiny and thin, so instead of trying to drill it out after, I fold a pin where I would drill that hole out, because it's a lot easier to pull that pin afterwards than it is to get a straight little drill through something thin. I'll also cut the finger shapes in at this time, like the pinky to the index finger. And I'll also cut in the individual fingers at this time too. But I won't cut them all the way to the bar, because if you do that, then there's nothing to drill out later. You'll see that when I go to assemble the hand. While I'm building up the arms and legs, I make sure I leave a little nippled area where I know the elbow or the knee are going to bend into each other. This is possible because I know where that joint's going to bend, so I leave a little flag up on that bead that I've wrapped, so I know that's where everything's going to close in. Working in thinner layers and constantly comparing left and right parts helps keep symmetry real good. Now I know every artist will say trust the process, but yeah, this almost looks like a stick man. But this is how every chest I build starts. It gives me a good solid socket start. It also lets me fine tune the placement I can see with the bars if things would run straight. My biggest trick and secret for keeping things as symmetrical as possible is work on left and right parts at the same time. I cut a muscle for one left leg, I cut the same muscle for the right leg and stick it on right after the left leg, and vice versa. I find if I do this, the body parts look very mirrored afterwards. In my opinion, the easiest way to keep a woman's waist looking feminine is to build it as a one-piece waist with just a pivot at the top. I find if you try putting a bead in a waist, it often ends up looking very masculine. And my secret to doing faces? You guessed it, little bits left to right, another little bit left to right. It's the easiest way to keep symmetry between a body piece, and working little bits at a time really is the easiest way to make a face. When I make a face, I'll usually keep going from side profile to face profile back to side profile, because I find if you can get both of those looking right, a tiny bit of blending, and your face usually looks like what you were intending to try and make. Using the ball stylus tool earlier when I was putting the eyeballs in to make sure she was looking forward right really pays off here, because you can fix the problem, but you'd rather not if you didn't have to. Now for my trusty 2-decade-old X-Acto knife. Yes, that blade has been in there for 2 decades. Now it is time to say bye-bye to these fingers. I'll cut it just a little bit above the thumb, and I want the cut to go square across and square down. It doesn't have to necessarily be smooth, just square across at the moment. There'll end up being a groove cut in that afterwards, so it doesn't really have to be super smooth, just square across. Because if you don't cut it square across, the hands won't open and close right, and the knuckles will look weird. Now, I do end up drilling out a lot of stuff, and when you drill out things, start with the super smallest drill bit you can possibly use without breaking the drill bit, and slowly work up to a much bigger drill bit to the size you need. See, just enough for it to slide. That's about perfect. That won't split once I put it in the oven. I don't really like to sand a lot. I have no problems doing carving though. The sanding produces little bits of dust, and I don't like breathing dust, and I hate wearing masks. So I'd rather just do a little bit of carving and a little bit of light sanding after, just to smooth up the corners of the carving. Plus, I do this all at the corner of my kitchen table. Newsflash! I have just been informed by my daughter that this character is a lot taller than my standard characters, so I need to make her taller. The easiest way to do that is to add another little spacer in at the top of the leg and at the bottom of the leg where I have not made a joint bead yet. Putting the same size spacer in each thigh and at the bottom of each shin makes it so that everything will still be just fine and my legs will still be the same length after. Drilling out that palm so we could put it on a bar has made it so we can make the bottom part of the glove. And that's where the socket bead will end up rolling around on. As you can see here, I have not exceeded more than half, and I do plan on trimming a little bit of it back with a razor blade after. Now that Suzy's cranial unit is approaching its natural size for the figure, it's starting to look a little alien, but that's okay. We're going to trust the process because she has a weird forehead. We extended the top of the legs at the thigh with that spacer. Now we got to do the bottom to the shin because I need to keep the thigh and the shin in relative close ratios to each other. And again, very easy. You can't even tell that we did not mean to do that. I should have probably just made the slipper foot in this mauve lavender color, but I was worried I was going to run out of it before I finished her, so I made some of the cores white instead. But really, come on, it's a foot. Like, how much material would I have actually used up? Probably about as much as it took to wrap it. Now Suzy's got some big old chubby cheeks on her, so I gotta make sure that I get those cheeks right when I make her. First I'll start with making sure her frontal facial profile looks right. It'll still look flat across the front, but when you're looking at her straight on, it'll have the right curves at the jawline. Now we're gonna finish hiding that correction we made in the leg height by wrapping the greeny teal around the top of her legs. Be picky, make sure things match. We'll take and wrap, pinch, and smooth that all the way around that slipper foot until everything looks pretty good. Then we'll trim it all flush on the bottom. Now, smoothing it out became a lot easier because of a little bit of excess squish from the bacon bond. We'll make sure we get a little more calf detail in while we're still using that color. And I think we're looking pretty good. Both things are looking pretty even, pretty close. One last little bit of smoothing on our extensions. We're good. Now I've only been at this sculpting thing for about 2 years, and I've only been paying attention on how to sculpt faces for the last year. So I'm by far not a professional, but I do a good enough job that they're not too scary. And some are almost cute. But I have definitely found that my face quality has gone up since I started using less clay and doing little bits and blending in. Now you notice I don't use a whole bunch of like rubbing alcohol to smooth out fingerprints and things. The reason is because of my other activities. I have almost no fingerprints, and my fingers actually are smoothing it out without fingerprints. I'm happy with how Suzy's face is coming along though. Because we lengthened Suzy Snacktime's legs, we are now going to have to make her arms longer also. If not, her body symmetry is going to get all messed up and won't look quite as symmetrical as we'd like. Like the legs, I've cut little spacers to increase the length a little bit. Although these spacers aren't nearly as big as the ones I made for increasing the lengths on the legs. They're the arms. We only have to increase their overall length a tiny bit to keep our proportions. With a spacer between the bicep and the shoulder bead and a little polymer clay, you can't even tell that wasn't supposed to be like that. Now we'll do the wrist just like we did the ankle, except it's going to be a lot easier to hide this union because she's going to have these red stripes that go up her forearm. To be honest, I wasn't even sure how I was going to do the stripes and spots on Suzy Snacktime. So this method I'm trying here is a total experiment. But it turned out pretty good, so I'm glad I did it. The idea is to bake all the red stripes on first, and then after, I'm going to smush some white clay in between where the red is. We'll see some of that later. While I got the red out though, I'm going to end up putting the little knuckle things on her gloves. One of the time savers for me is when I have one color out, I like to do a bunch of different parts with that color while I have it out, instead of constantly having to pull it out, condition it, make something, pack it up, and then a little later you pull it out and you condition it and you make something. I try to make a lot of the parts I need with the red right at the same time, or whatever color I'm working with, because not having to pull it out and condition it and back and forth saves me a lot more time. That lets me do more building. I'll finish off the thighs just like I did the wrists by wrapping them with multiple bands of this red. I'm not really sure how many stripes there is, so I'm just going to make a bunch, whatever fills up the space nicely. With our progress all locked in by baking it, I'll go back in and start doing more sculpting on the face. Again, adding just tiny little bits. Now when doing faces, there's always some feature that is prevalent. It stands out in the character. And Suzy Snacktime really kind of has three. Her eyes have a certain kind of shape and look. She's got these cheeks and a very, very distinguishable little nose. Now I'm lucky because the ears are going to be hidden underneath some great big hair, so I don't have to worry about making really detailed ones. I can get away with some pretty simple ears on this face. But from the simple little skull we started out with, you wouldn't have thought she would have ended up being as cute as she did. It is definitely a lot trickier sculpting a known character than an unknown, that's for sure. Now, every time I build, I try to increase the skills I learn. And one of the things I wanted to learn more about in this one was rolling thinner pieces of polymer clay. And I think the experiment went pretty well. I was hoping that her mauvish French cut vesty thing wouldn't be too thick. I'm lucky and unlucky both in the same boat because my projects usually have so many different things going on. Adding 2 or 3 new techniques or skills usually doesn't hamper my builds too much. I do love these waists with the pivot tops, just because you can put so much more detail in a waist than you can if you have a bead moving around in that center. Sure, the figure isn't going to have as much movement, but with these type with a ballish shape at the top, you get a really decent amount of movement on a figure with a waist like this. It's actually my second favorite type to build. I would like to take a moment here while I'm wrapping Suzy's lower torso to ask for your help. Some likes definitely charges me up to produce my next builds. And any comments I could get on some editing, what you would like to see more of, less of, what you'd like me to include, any of these would be super helpful because the less time I'm doing editing, the more time I'm building, and I'd much prefer to be building. I've rambled on long enough that we've almost completely finished wrapping her lower half. Now, because she's been wrapped, there'll be air trapped in there. So we need to push them fart bubbles out. Yeah. Because if they're trapped in there when we bake, it could break, crack, or cause problems. We'll make some little wheels for Suzy's heels, and her feet are almost done. So I had to finish the lower torso first so I could wrap it in aluminum foil so that I could build her upper torso right on top of that pivoting ball that we made. Building my figures and constructing them right on the joints that they're going to use is how I keep everything all tight looking. The trickiest part in making her upper torso is going to be leaving the front pretty much hollow for the candies. I know I could just use some black paint around the eyes afterwards and get that eyeliner look, but that's not going to increase my sculpting skills any, so I've opted to actually line around it with some black polymer clay. It is a lot easier to try out a new technique on something that looks more cartoonish than it is than something that looks a lot more realistic. And luckily for me, Suzy Snacktime has some big old bushy red eyebrows, so I won't have to do too much detail work. I'll just have to make sure they follow a proper arc and that they're even in length, or even-ish at least. Unibrow. Then it's a matter of fine-tuning those eyebrows just a little bit to give an expression. I had no idea how I was going to make her chest, make it look feminine, and be hollow enough that I could make a bunch of little itty-bitty round polymer clay candies to fill in it. So I opted to trust my carving skills and decided that I would end up drilling in, carving it out after, which made the whole trying to make it hollow pointless. Here we're going to fit her candy basket in place, and once it's all baked, I'm going to drill and cut it into that precious heart shape. Now, metallic polymer clays like silver, I usually like to leave to the end at different times, because if you handle it too much, you get sparkles, like glitter, trapped in your fingerprints. And then you'll touch other darker polymer clays, and they will look like they were at the dancers for the night. With the white out, I can go into doing the little heart to go on the top of her shoes. Then there's the little band that goes around her shoulder ball. I have no idea what it is on the outfit, but it's got like a white semicircle around it, so I'm going to form that on. Back into my ongoing experiment, I'm going to cut some white dots using my leather hole punch to put on the bottom of Suzy Snacktime's shins. She has these round circles. I don't want to paint them on, and I don't want the polymer clay to be raised. So in conjunction with my stripe experiment, I'm doing these dot experiments too. I'm so nervous to see if my experiment turns out the way I hope it will. When I wrap Suzy's upper body, I'm going to do it in sections, because in her pictures, a lot of times it looks like she's got almost plates on her body, whereby you'll see seam lines. So I figure if I cut most of the part of the pieces to go on her at the same spots as those seam lines would be, that even if I wasn't able to smooth them out 100%, it would look like they're supposed to be there. I use this same technique when I'm doing clothing like jackets on characters that I'm forming the clothing on, and it works really well in that scenario, so I'm hoping it turns out good in this one too. Now before I rush to the next step, I'll let it sit for a while so that bacon bond can do its thing and kind of soak in to the pre-baked clay and the fresh baked, which will help keep it from sliding around, which should make this trimming of the heart out a lot easier. I've already drilled out the space and kind of carved it as close to a heart as I can. And I'm hoping that while I'm doing my sculpting and stuff, I'll be able to refine its shape a little better. But to be honest, if I get even close, I'm happy. Now there's a little white panel at her lower back that I'm going to put a little piece of clay in. I could have tried and paint this, but when I get sculpting, I try to do everything in as much clay as I can. Here we're going to do that underwire system to hold those candies up. And with the last snip, we got a place to hold Easter eggs. Before we can start making Suzy's big old ponytails, we have to make sure we build a head cap so that we'll be able to stick everything to it afterwards. And now on to my little experiment. I got the idea from seeing how people do canes and things, and I figured if I baked the red stripes first, then squished some white polymer clay stripes in between them and smoothed them out, I'd be able to bake it and sand it, and then those stripes would be crisp beside each other. I did the same to the lower leg, but because it's not stripes I can feed through it, I kind of had to coat it, and I'm going to have to do a lot more sanding. I actually thought about doing a cane for Suzy's hair, but I thought it was going to be a little more tricky and difficult, and it's not really something in my wheelhouse. So I started laying out Suzy's chunky block hairdo and making her ponytails, knowing that I was going to paint everything after. Even though the hair is simpler than what I usually make, because I was trying to follow the patterns I could find on pictures of how her hair went, and not being a hairstyle that I'm used to making, it took a lot longer than I originally anticipated it would, but it was still fun to make. Usually when I do hair on a character, it's very similar to how you would do a welt wig. I do a lot of separation of the hair in little sections and stick them on. I do like hairdos though that have this little bit of hair in front of the ears. Because my hair is removable, it helps keep the hair there by centering it with the ear. I do like that her hair's in these plates and I can just put them down and that's pretty much it. No styling. But that is where I thought the hair was going to be easier and quicker to make, because it's just big flat chunks, not all the little wispies I usually put in. Each one of these plates have their own distinctive shape, and they have their own curvatures and arcs within them. Yes, Manny. Luckily, most of my cuts were decent enough that I didn't have to do any blending for the plates. With my pre-shaped ponytails, I can put them into the divots I have in the skull cap already put in with some ball stylus and a small coating of bacon bond. With the small amount of bacon bond already there for about 5 minutes, when I go to shape it, it'll stay in place almost like it had been baked. Makes me want to go to Wendy's for a burger. I'm going to finish off these shoulder sockets by squeezing in a little bit of fresh black clay, just so that the surface will be nice and smooth. We'll prepare her knees for her heart-shaped knee pads that'll act as stops for the legs. You can see those dots on the shins really nicely where I sanded it down to expose those white dots. Now to make her little dress, we're going to have a form of some sort. So what better to use as a core than the waist it's going to be sitting on? Using the actual waist will ensure that whatever I make is going to be able to slip over and sit roughly where I want on the waist. And wrapping it with the aluminum foil will ensure that nothing sticks. Now Suzy's dress isn't skin tight, it's got some flow to it and some space. So in order to do that, I'm going to bulk it up with some aluminum foil and coat that with some tape. The tape will just help ensure a smoother surface for the skirt to drape over. Now I actually had to exercise my gray matter pretty good to figure out how I was going to make this dress. So pretty much this whole process was another experiment. I do have a tendency to perform a lot of experiments when I'm making things. I wanted to avoid doing a lot of painting, and I didn't want any of the edges to be too bulky or the stripes. So like the stripes on her legs and the dots on her shins, I wanted this to be kind of a smooth transition between the colors. So tacking the pieces up together and then just giving them a little roll so they squish into each other, but not enough to change their shape or color. After letting it cool, I was able to peel it off the parchment paper I rolled it with. I could use cornstarch and all that to try and make it peel off easier. But for what I do, I need it to retain as much strength as possible, especially knowing I'm going to be adhering another layer of clay on. I really don't like the idea of having any cornstarch or anything on the surface. I do build these figures as more of a toy than just a showpiece. Draping the dress over the floor, making sure I get some wrinkles and stuff. And it needs to hang a little longer at the front than the back. That just seems to be how the character wears it. Now once I've shaped that underlying skirt, I'm not going to bake it. I'm going to set it aside. I'll let it cool so that it stiffens up really well. And then I'll start adding more pieces onto it with Bacon Bond, so I have fresh clay with Bacon Bond fresh clay, so that I'll get the maximum strength I can get from this union of the two polymer clays. Layering up the other layers for like the darker pink will just increase strength for this dress. Having a defined waist edge will make it so much easier when I go to put in this mauvish color secondary dress to go on top. I made it the same way I made the white and red one below, just with an extra stripe. Now I don't want to press or deform any of the colors, so I will very gently coax that material around and kind of arcing as I try to get the two ends to meet up and the stripes to line up at the same spots. Going through and blending each color in individually will help kind of just disappear that seam line. A little bit of shaping to make sure it follows the fabric kind of flow of the underneath will ensure everything kind of looks flowy. With some last little details, we'll bake everything in. Now I could have tried putting all the white into the red with canes, but it's not my wheelhouse, and this was one of the times paint just seemed easier. Maybe, if I can hold on to it. I tried to get most of the spots where her pictures show her having the pinky white in her hair, but I didn't follow the patterns 100%. At this point, I just wanted to finish her and get on to the next figure. Not that I wasn't enjoying building her, it was just I was really looking forward to the next one. Here I'm just covering everything with an acrylic glaze so it's glossy and kind of metallic-y or plasticky looking. You don't really need to seal polymer clay, but once it's baked it's kind of porous, and if you're touching it with your hands a lot, especially on white, you will notice the buildup and the transfer of oils from your hands. Now in my creations there is a lot of drilling. I like to use these little hand drills, and I use a lot of drill bits. I'll start with the smallest bit possible and work my way up. I like using this conical shaper. It's a Dremel bit. I like it for starting my holes. It's got a very sharp point on it, and it just makes it so your drill bit doesn't skate all over the place when you're starting. Plus, when you're done drilling your holes, it puts a nice little 45 chamfer on the outside edge. Now, polymer clay is quite easy to drill, so I like using these hand drills, because if you drill too fast, mistakes can happen real quick. And I will start with the smallest drill bit and slowly work up to the opening size that I need. Let the drill bit do the work. If you try to push the drill bit through, you're going to crack the piece. So let the spinning clear the material and just let it naturally go through. After all the work of making these pieces, this is one of the times that you have to slow down, because if you rush, you're going to break things. But if you go slow, more than likely everything will work out just fine. Now when I drill, I don't drill from one side halfway and then switch over to the other side halfway. I'll usually drill all the way through and then switch sides and drill all the way back through. Starting out with a smaller drill bit, if they're not entirely in line, it'll give you a little wiggle room as you're working up the drill bit sizes, that by the time you get to your finished drill bit, it'll go straight through both sides, no problem. When I'm drilling out, I have a test assembly elastic I have set up. So as I drill the pieces, I can drill them and put them on the elastic and see how everything's fitting, so I don't even go on to the next piece until everything lines up well. One of the biggest secrets to creating a ball jointed figure is to try and leave your elastics going in as straight a line as possible. If their resting place is at a 90, they're not going to stay at 90. They're going to try and go straight. So when I do my hips, it's almost like a Y shape that comes through. That way I have an elastic go down the left side, the right side, but they come down and almost straight out in a straight line. When you're doing the hips, remembering this actually makes it so that your characters will stand better and have a firmer pose. Creating a hip bead isn't all that hard, and with something to center your first hole, about halfway and in a straight line, but try not to follow the seam where you made your bead. Starting with that center hole where you want your space to finish at, I'll carve a straight line to my pass hole that's already present. This will give me a straight line so that I can do some little drill holes to go from the outside to the center, so I can clear out this material without having to carve it all. Drilling these little holes first makes it so I just have to connect the holes when I go through and drill up and cut everything out. Some joint beads I have found benefit from having a hollow post come out through it. This thigh bead that I'm making here, the post to be able to ride down into the thigh, so when you go to move the leg up or out, it will follow and control it so much better than if it wasn't there. You'll be able to really notice it at the end when I show you the movement. When I'm drilling out things like the legs and the knees, I try to drill them out for just as much room as the elastic needs to move around freely. At the top of the thighs though, I will need to drill it out just a little bit bigger to accept this new post. Make it a double jointed bead like this knee bead. It's important that both the top and the bottom line up for where you carve the space for the elastics to move through. If you don't, the knee joint or the elbow will move very, very wonky. And again, I'll drill out a bunch of little holes after so that I don't have to worry about clearing too much, and I just follow the center of those holes. And I just make it so that it's smooth enough for the bar to move through. Now I learned a while ago that if you drill just a big enough hole for things like the knees and the elbows, and you cut just a big enough space for the elastic to move through for it to bend, it will help keep the lateral stability of the joint. Unlike the thigh, the shin is just a basic drill out with just enough space for that elastic to move freely through. You don't want them binding up because it messes with the tension for the joints. A trick I do for my ankles and my wrists is I drill the beads out with as big a hole as I can possibly drill without breaking the bead. I find if I do this, I get a lot of good rotation without having to carve a slit into that tiny bead and weakening it. Drilling out the foot to accept an eye loop of the elastic, and then cross drilling it with another hole to accept a pin to act as a stop bar, is my favorite way for attaching feet and hands that don't have movable toes or fingers. And if you cut the pin head off, you'd barely see where you slid the bar in. Sometimes I attach heads, sometimes they just sit on a peg. Suzy's getting the peg style. It's the easiest to do. Now, before I can start stringing the body together, I need a way for the elastics from the feet to get tension to the head. Here I'm going to make a neck with a peg top and a small hanging loop. And the loop is where I'll be able to put the elastic into. I start by inserting a string into a straw. I clip it off so I don't pull it out the other end while I'm crazy gluing. And then I insert a piece of toothpick coated with Gorilla Glue gel. Now the toothpick and the string actually slide extremely tightly into this tube. So the glue is just to kind of make sure everything stays there. I've actually stumbled across a new way for making these that I much prefer and I'll probably do more of. In my playlist I have a video on how I make these figure 8 elastics. I don't tie them together, I sew them together so there's no knot to worry about. It also shows you how I size up the elastic for the figures I'm building. With some folded over guitar strings on the ends of these loops to act like a sewing needle, I'm feeding them down in through the body, and when I do it I make sure that I don't get them tangled, and I want all the left side elastics to come down on the left side and the right side elastic to come down on the right side. I want to keep it as balanced as possible. It keeps the best tension, and with having this figure 8 looped elastic, both sides are already equally length, so it makes it a lot easier. I find having a pair of locking forceps to be extremely handy, because when you pull the elastic end out to get that loop, it's nice to have something to lock onto it with so it doesn't go springing back into the body. Because if you have that loop loose, it makes it extremely easy to put the foot in there, and the loop eye will be open, and it makes it a lot easier to maneuver the stop pin in place. Now that I've built a few of these dolls, a time saver I do is I put the arms in while they're still on the bar, and that way I can size up the elastic without doing a test fitting. I can go straight from drilling to assembly now. When I do this, I'll start on one side from the shoulder, then the bicep, then the elbow, then the forearm, then the wrist, then the hand, then the finger. I can slide that elastic into the torso, and then go into doing the other side. Here we're doing a shoulder. The shoulder is done very much like a hip bead, whereabouts it will have a post that comes down into the bicep to help control the arm. After drilling out some little passages, just like we did for the hip bead, I'll go in and clear out a section so that the elastics can move freely through it. And we'll also drill out and insert the tube. Now these tubes, it's actually a stir stick, coffee stir stick. I bought 2,000 of them online for like $4 2 years ago. Any kind of plastic straw or tube will work. It's just I wanted to have something standardized, and I'm not even through my first bag of 500 yet. The elbow is exactly like the knee, just itty bitty. So it still needs the little center hole spots whereabouts everything comes down. But I find I don't have to drill all the multiple little holes, because pretty much once you start carving that slot to center those holes, you can pretty much finish carving them out with the knife. Just take your time and just clear little niblets out at a time. You don't want to break it at this point. The wrist is just a straight through drill out with just enough for the elastic to move around. Like the ankle, we're going to drill out this wrist bead with as big a hole in it as we can possibly make without splitting the bead. And then I'll make sure I just chamfer the edges lightly so that it'll keep it from splitting. Drilling out the hands can be tricky, so don't get over enthusiastic. Use as small a drill bit as you can and drill it out just as much as you absolutely have to for the elastic to go through easily. Use your fingers while you're drilling it out to add support to the outside edges so nothing breaks. Now for one of the secrets of my doll construction, my opening and closing hands. This is possible due to the groove at the end of the hand where the elastic comes out. Because when we made our fingers, we folded it over, it naturally made this rounded back that'll be able to ride inside that chamfer that we just made. But for the fingers to be able to do that, we got to drill a tiny little hole right beside that bar in the center of the fingers, and then cut a little groove that goes all the way through both sides, and with enough space to go around the end of that pin. Now this is where I said pulling that pin was a lot easier than trying to drill that hole. And once I cut that pin, I make sure I file it so that it goes to an almost rounded point. Now we slide that hand bead on just like it's a regular old bead. And we can lock out that loop. And now witness the easiest and my most favorite way to attach elastics to the ends of my fingers. It's effortless, it's easy, and the benefits you reap from it are so good. Thought we were finished? So did I, but I forgot to make her cupcake hat. That's okay, I always meant to put it on with a magnet after anyways, because I think she's a lot cuter without the hat. I don't know why they stuck a cupcake on her head. Looking forward to what I'm going to be making this year for my posts. I guess making some polymer clay food would be some good practice. I'm going to throw more stuff that I like to do out there more this year, like accessories. It's ball jointed dolls and accessories. I haven't been building much accessories. So guess what we're going to do this year? We're going to add some more of them. But that means I'm going to be making less dolls. So I've had to rethink how I'm going to do everything. I think this year I'm going to concentrate on 2 main figures and a lot of accessories and how I build them. And I'm also going to be doing my search on building the best ball jointed Monster High body blank. I'll still make some additional figures at different times, but this will just free it up to do originally what I wanted to do when I got into this, was make my own character, my own toys, my own action figure. Now, I mentioned earlier that I planned on putting her Cupcake hat on with a magnet. There will be a pair of them, one inside the cupcake, one inside her hair. One thing to know about magnets is a lot of times if you bake them, they're going to lose their magnetic field. So it's just easiest to drill and put them in after. I don't think there's been a character to date that I haven't made and not made them a weapon of some sort. You know, a girl's got to be able to protect herself. Originally I was thinking maybe a whack-a-mole club, but the more I made her, the more she kind of felt Harley Quinn-ish, especially once she got the ponytails. And at that point I decided, no, Suzy Snacktime needed a fun time mallet. Now I could have made her just a run-of-the-mill, plain old wooden mallet. Here's the thing about polymer clay though. If you have a whole bunch of little bits of scrap color kicking around, it usually ends up drying out before you can get to it. So I find it's best just to use it up while you got it and it's fresh. And I really don't know the next time I'm going to get around to using many of these colors, especially the mauvey lavenderish color. So I decided to use all my end colors to make her mallet pretty, kind of like her. Now when I was imagining how to make Suzy Snacktime's Fun Time mallet, I was envisioning something from like the Carnival, the Midway, something from like one of the games. So I wanted to have it look all padded up and fun and cutesy because people like to touch and use pretty things. Now, I really can't stress enough how important it is to use bacon bond. One of the most common answers I've ever given to people who are just getting into polymer clay is that they have pieces that are popping off all the time. Now the simple use of a bake adhesive, it's inexpensive, it goes a far way, and I have it out every time I sculpt. There's nothing more disheartening than sitting down, sculpting something, putting all your time and energy into it, just to bake it, pull it out of the oven, touch it, and have something fall off. This is why I recommend using a bake adhesive, something like Sculpey Bacon Bond, every time you sculpt. Because when you're fighting with the confidence of having pieces stick, and you want to make detailed things, you're less likely to push the envelope on the details you're willing to put in if you're half concerned about going through and re-gluing everything back on after. So if you're thinking about getting into something like this or just sculpting in general, when you go to buy your first pack of polymer clay, I highly recommend, that you also buy a little tube of bake adhesive to go with it. I guarantee you will not be sorry. A lot of my construction and the details I put into my figures would not be possible without the use of a bake adhesive. Now something you'll notice is I do like to sculpt in colored polymer clay. One of the reasons is if you sculpt in a colored clay, it almost looks finished right off the bat. And when you're first starting out, you don't have a whole lot of money for paint and brushes too. With a colored clay, as long as you have enough paints to go in and do a few highlights after, or maybe a wash, makes it a lot cheaper. I'm going to put a heart on the mallet faces so that Suzy can claim it as giving a love tap. Make it look like she's tapped a few others. With Suzy all assembled, let's see how much articulation a homemade toy actually has. Suzy's Funtime mallet is ready to dish out some love. Because Suzy's skirt is solid, it will hamper some of her leg movement. But because I made it so it kind of floated on her waist, it shouldn't be too bad. Her magnetic cupcake hat, as promised. I always make my dolls so their hair comes off, and their head is also a standard feature usually for me. But even with this pegged on head, it still gets a good amount of movement and can look left and right. It's actually not uncommon for me to make multiple hairs for a character, but I wasn't doing Suzy's purple outfit too. Because we use those tubes in the arms and legs, it makes it very easy to position the arm. And double elbow joints gives us a better than 90 at the bend. And here you can see those over drilled beads for the wrists give that hand and wrist so much natural movement. Even though I went with that pivot waist top, it still has an amazing amount of movement, both crunch and lateral left to right, including a helicopter rotation. The whole reason I made the skirt as its own separate piece was so that the legs would be able to move and do some poses. Even with this solid skirt though, we are able to demonstrate how much movement her legs actually have. This pose really makes me want to make Ballora also. Now Suzy is able to stand on her own without the aid of anything, but unfortunately, stop animation for her requires a stand. That hair is just way too heavy. Now, let's put Suzy Snacktime in the selfie spotlight. If you found any of this helpful, or even entertaining, please give us a like. If you'd like to know when something new gets posted, and maybe help the channel grow, hit that subscribe and notify. I appreciate your views and thank you for watching. Remember to watch to the end of my videos. I do have a habit of putting sneak peeks in. This is my 35-year-old, 2.5-decade played Dungeons & Dragons character. I'll show you how I made him, and I'll share his story.